Take that medal off. This is a courtroom, not a place to parade your pride." The room fell silent. The man at the witness stand didn't move. His old jacket, the faint gleam of steel on his left chest, there it was, the Medal of Honor, something few have ever seen outside a museum. But today, it was here, at the heart of what looked like a pointless civil case, a minor dispute over a backyard easement. Why had that veteran worn it? Why did its presence make the judge uneasy? And who was the soldier in uniform sitting quietly in the back row? Who would rise, speak 5 words, and bring the entire court to a breathless halt? All right, my dear viewers, brace yourselves for a story that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly feel what I'm about to share. Then drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see friends joining us from every corner of the world. Roy Merritt had served in SEAL Team 4, undertaking numerous missions in Helmand and Kandahar, yet he had never given an interview, never once spoken of his past. To the neighbors around the little house at the edge of the woods, he was simply the silver-haired man of few words, often seated on the wooden stoop with a cup of coffee and a distant gaze. No one had ever seen him angry. No one had ever heard him tell a story. He was a man who had lived through too much, then chose to live as if nothing had happened. That day, Roy did not enter the courtroom like a hero. He walked alone. No lawyer, no family, no followers, except the shadow of himself. But what silenced the entire room was what lay on his chest: the Medal of Honor. It did not glitter like jewelry, nor was it displayed for show. It simply rested there, as natural as flesh and bone. The lawsuit itself was nothing dramatic. A narrow pathway behind a house, leading to a koi pond. One side claimed the right to fence it off. The other insisted it was a public easement used for decades. Roy stood between them as a witness. He was the one to whom the previous owner had handed the gate key back in 1991. Judge Hale, renowned for his cold judicial style and intolerance of any personal symbols, studied Roy for a long moment. His gaze was not angry, but proud. He saw that medal as an unnecessary flaunt, a distraction from the solemnity of the court. "Final warning," he said. His voice was even, dry, as if reciting a statute. There was no warmth, no concession. He was the sort who believed law trumped memory, law trumped blood. Roy did not react immediately. He stood tall, arms relaxed at his sides. His eyes bore no defiance, only something deep and ancient. Perhaps fatigue, perhaps an unhealed wound. Then, in a voice just loud enough to be heard, yet reverberating like a low tolling bell in every listener's mind, he replied, "You're mistaken. I don't wear it to boast. I wear it to remember." No one spoke. For several seconds, the room sank into a profound silence, as if everyone suddenly saw something they had never understood, that some symbols lie beyond the reach of rules, and some memories cannot be commanded off the body. Judge Hale's brow furrowed slightly, yet he did not answer at once. In that moment, Roy remained unmoving, neither retreating nor advancing, neither bowing his head nor lowering his gaze. A man nearly 80, and yet in that instant he seemed taller than the cold courtroom itself, not because of action, but because of inaction, and that inaction held every eye captive. No one could know what Roy was thinking then. Perhaps he recalled that January night on the outskirts of Kandahar when a comrade fell on his shoulder and he had to drag them both from the hail of bullets. Perhaps he remembered another time, a helicopter engulfed in flames. Perhaps he simply heard the breaths of those no longer here to witness him remove the badge they died for. Some in the gallery shifted in their seats. An elderly woman bowed her head. A court officer glanced at the floor. Those small reactions were the voice of repressed emotion. No applause followed. No tears fell. Yet everyone knew they had witnessed something that transcended mere procedure. And in the midst of it all, Roy remained silent. No defense needed, no statutes cited. He just stood there, letting his presence tell the entire story. Not a sound. Roy lifted his hand to the metal on his chest. His weathered fingers touched the cold metal as though brushing against a memory no one was allowed to touch. He removed it, neither hurried nor slow, like a soldier unwrapping a tourniquet from an old wound. The motion was practiced, yet heavy. Then he placed it on the wooden surface before him, amid the courtroom's icy stillness. The metal lay there, silent. No spotlight, no name called, like an unmarked grave, like the burial mound of a memory he had just been forced to enter alive. No one spoke. The silence was no longer defiance, but witness. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Every person, from the officer by the door to the legal clerk bent over her notes, felt they had witnessed something that could not be captured by law. Roy sat down, gently, as if he too did not wish to leave an imprint on the chair. He folded his hands on his lap, straightened his back, and stared ahead, seeking neither sympathy nor affirmation. He simply sat there, like a man compelled to exist in a place no longer meant for those who carry their past. The attorney began his questions, his tone even, formal, as if addressing any ordinary witness. Yet each of Roy's answers cut through the charged air like a thin blade. He spoke briefly, precisely. No superfluous words, no anger, no display, just information. Concise, sharp, cold. Like a soldier signaling with lights in the dark, each flash revealing just enough of a memory to understand, without inciting pain. He spoke not of missions completed, nor of comrades fallen beside him, but in every breath, in every slight nod, one sensed an undercurrent of memories raging beneath that calm exterior. Each of his words felt like a stone carefully placed on the tomb of brothers no longer living. No one glanced at the land map anymore. No one cared about boundaries or ownership rights. All eyes remained fixed on him, on his hollowed cheekbones, the sinewy hands resting on his lap, the crow's foot wrinkles marking old roads to places they had never known. No tears were shed, no sobs heard, but everyone felt a weight pressing on their chests, something invisible, yet undeniably real. The wound was not from what he said, but from what necessity had silenced. And there, in the midst of it all, Roy sat. No metal on his chest, yet his posture remained erect, not from pride, but from loyalty to things that cannot be removed. In that room where justice was believed blind, that day they judged far more than a right-of-way. They unwittingly judged an icon, and that icon, ultimately, needed no defense. The plaintiff's attorney rose. He was not in a hurry, but it was clear he was preparing for a decisive strike. His suit was crisp. His youthful face bore the confidence honed through decades of litigation. He stepped forward, each footfall light enough to go unnoticed, yet resonant enough to convey control. When he reached the witness stand, he paused to adjust the microphone. Then he looked up at Roy. Roy did not move. His gaze remained fixed ahead, neither avoiding nor overly focusing, as if he were there in body only, his mind already far away. His expression was so calm it gave the attorney pause. But the attorney hesitated not for long. This was no part of his performance. The question was posed in a tone both clear and oddly measured. Do you agree that memories can fade over time? A seemingly innocuous question, logical, strategic, a way to call into question the accuracy of testimony, especially from a man nearing 80. But it had been addressed to the wrong witness, and the entire courtroom recognized that before Roy even spoke. He lifted his eyes. Those eyes held no bitterness, no challenge, only a depth like a well whose bottom was steeped in the passages of time. A gaze not directed at the attorney, but piercing through him, reaching further, to places only someone like Roy had ever trodden, to moments no court could ever recreate. He was silent for a few seconds. Then he answered, I remember the death circumstances of every comrade. Each word was not loud, yet it carried the weight of 100 oaths. It was not a rebuttal, nor an attempt at self-defense. It was an affirmation, quiet, yet unshakable. The attorney froze. He did not interrupt, did not react, nor did he offer his customary smile. His face remained awkwardly rigid, because no one had taught him how to proceed after such an answer. Roy continued to look forward, but spoke no more. It was as if he had answered not just the attorney, but the ghosts of those no longer here to testify. The atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift, an unmistakable sensation, though no one voiced it. Those seated suddenly felt their spines straighten, as if they needed to sit erect to bear witness. A woman in the third row pressed her hand to her chest. An older man gently nodded, not in denial but in respect. The entire room seemed to take a step back, making space for the truth just unveiled. To Roy, memory was not something verifiable by logic. It was blood, ragged breaths, the cold hand in his own, the sound of helicopters echoing through the night, the order to withdraw in his earpiece, and the explosions at his back. Memory, to him, was the most enduring burden a person could bear. No one could ask whether it might dim, because he was living proof of the loss it commemorated. Finally, the attorney adjusted his posture. He cast a glance toward the judge, as if awaiting a rescue signal, but none came. Roy lowered his gaze, as though the conversation had ended, and in truth, it had never been an argument. It was a reminder, a gentle warning that not everything can be weighed on the scales of evidence. In the end, the attorney merely nodded. No follow-up questions, no further defense. He stepped back, slower than he had advanced, because what he had encountered was not mere testimony, but a piece of collective memory no one had the right to deny. Silence fell once more in the courtroom, but this time it was no longer awkward or strained. It was solemn. Everyone knew something had changed, not in the substance of the case, but in how they viewed a man, how they regarded a symbol that needed no name. And from that moment on, the rest of the trial was mere formality. Roy remained seated. The medal was gone from his chest, yet he sat upright, not out of pride, but out of loyalty to truths that cannot be removed. All right, dear audience, relax a moment, or take a sip of water, then stay with us. There are more surprises ahead. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see friends joining us from across the globe. Comment 1 if you find this story compelling, so we can continue bringing you more great stories. When Judge Hale leaned toward the microphone, ready to deliver a decisive ruling, a command meant to close the somber tension in the courtroom, a voice rose from the back. Not loud, but clear. Very clear. Just 4 words. Your Honor, may I speak? No one saw him stand. No one noticed when he took his place. But now, every eye turned to the rear. A man in immaculate uniform emerged from the last row. His steps were firm, unostentatious. He advanced neither hastily nor hesitantly, as if he had carried with him from the outset a purpose heavy enough to shatter the silence. That man was Michael Gaines, Lieutenant Commander, SEAL Team 6, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, a figure whose presence in certain locales news outlets only name in passing. On his chest, amid the ribbons, gleamed the Medal of Honor. No one in that room could mistake that symbol. No one failed to recognize it as adornment worn only by those who faced death to save others, and survived. He stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed unwaveringly on Judge Hale. There was not a hint of hesitation, nor any semblance of supplication. His voice was composed, yet each syllable carried an undeniable weight. I pulled Roy Merritt from a burning helicopter. That was not my valor. It was his. No one interrupted. No one stirred. The courtroom felt sealed by the gravity of his words. Gaines did not raise his voice. He did not embellish. But every word he spoke seemed carved from the very experiences only he could verify. He does not wear that medal for glory, Gaines continued. He wears it for those who are no longer here to wear it. Hale reclined in his chair, not in relaxation, but as one grasping for the authority that had slipped from his grasp. He studied Gaines, but this time, his eyes were not those of an arbiter. They were the eyes of a man confronted with a truth he could no longer deny. Roy remained silent. He did not look at Gaines, nor did he nod or shed a tear. Yet the hand resting on his thigh clenched briefly, then released. An involuntary reflex. A memory spoken on his behalf. Gaines stepped forward another pace toward the witness stand. He did not expound, nor cite any statute. He paused, bent slightly, retrieved the Medal of Honor Roy had removed, and raised it, not too high, but high enough for all to see. He spoke no more. None was needed. In his gaze lay an unspoken vow. If Roy were forced into silence, men like him would not be. With no superfluous gesture, Gaines returned to his seat. No one stopped him. No one questioned his right to speak, for clearly he needed no permission. He had standing. The courtroom remained breathlessly quiet. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a forum for debating property rights. It had become a place where living memory had stepped in, and by its very presence, altered the focus of judgment. Judge Hale looked down at his bench. He did not write, nor did he rap his gavel. He simply sat, hands still on the desk, motionless, a man stripped of the veneer of authority, not by law, but by morality. And there, amidst it all, Roy Merritt sat, speechless, unmoving, but for the first time since he entered the room, his face softened ever so slightly at the corners of his mouth, not a smile, but a sign of something deeper, the acknowledgement that he was not alone, and that, in a man like Roy, was thanks enough. Michael Gaines stepped forward slowly. Each footfall made no sound, yet it felt as if the entire room leaned toward him. No one spoke. No one signaled. No procedure took place. But in that charged air, everyone knew what was coming. When he reached the witness stand where Roy still sat motionless, his eyes did not look at the man, but fixed instead on the object lying quietly on the wooden surface, the medal, a symbol once bestowed under hundreds of flashing lights, now resting mute. No spotlight, no applause. A small piece of metal cast out of its context, like a fragment of memory forced into oblivion. Michael bent at the waist, a movement both gentle and precise. He lifted the Medal of Honor with both hands, as though handling something fragile. A beat of silence. Then he straightened. No call to arms, no interrogation. He held the medal aloft, just high enough for everyone in the room to see it. And when he spoke, his voice was low, yet it resonated as if amplified by all the memories in his heart. "I do not return his honor to him," he said, eyes meeting Roy's, "for he never lost it." Another pause. Then he continued, measured and clear. "I only bring back the remembering." In that moment, no one could distinguish who was testifying and who was listening. From the rows in the back, a man stood, unobtrusively, without looking around. Simply stood. Then another, someone farther down the row, until an entire bench rose. All were veterans. No signal passed among them. No one told another to stand. Yet each, in silent accord, chose to, using their very presence to affirm what the system had just tried to deny, that some existences cannot be forgotten. No applause broke out. No chants rang out. They stood as banners in a solemn vigil with no music. They rose not in protest, but in recognition. Not for Roy, but for themselves. For in Roy, they saw something that had once been theirs, something thought lost in papers and protocol. Judge Hale remained seated, silent. He offered no objection, struck no gavel. He simply sat, eyes fixed on the emptiness before him, as though holding on to something slipping from his grasp. Roy still did not move, but one thing had changed. He looked up, and his eyes met Michael's. No words were spoken, no nod exchanged, but an unspoken understanding passed between them, as though two soldiers on a dark night in some distant place needed only one glance to repair a broken bond. Michael did not return the medal to Roy. He did not place it back on his chest, nor did he pocket it. Instead, he turned, walked to the center of the room, and laid the Medal of Honor on a small table beside the court clerk. Then he returned to the back row, standing among the others, silent, reverent. It was a ritual not written in any manual, a protest needing no slogan, yet its weight tilted the entire room toward one side, the side where honor is redefined not by law, but by memory and sacrifice. An elderly veteran near the door bowed his head. Another removed his cap and held it over his heart. None of them knew Roy personally, yet all knew exactly who he was. And so, among those without pomp, among uniforms worn and frayed, a moment was forged, not to celebrate, but to remember, not to restore honor, but to remind that it was never lost. Roy Merritt remained seated, his gaze fixed on the medal. He made no move to retrieve it, no need, because he knew that in that moment it was no longer an object. It had become a living memory, preserved by those who could never forget. 1 week after the trial, Judge Hale submitted his application for early retirement. There was no farewell ceremony, no resignation speech. The court's press office issued only a simple statement, citing personal reasons. But everyone understood that he could no longer sit in that seat, not because the law forbade it, but because his conviction had quietly departed. The media had been barred from filming that day in court. No reporters, no microphones, no lenses capturing every moment. Yet no camera was needed, because a few minutes of clandestine footage from an attendee's phone, recording Lieutenant Commander Michael Gaines rising and speaking, spread through online communities like an avalanche. Within hours, it had appeared on veteran forums, social media feeds, and even late-night news bulletins. No one spoke of the land dispute's substance anymore. No one remembered boundary markers or easement rights. But everyone vividly recalled the old man who sat still, offered no resistance, withdrew no word. And they remembered the soldier in uniform who stepped forward, not asking permission of the law, but asking for decency. A small-town civil hearing had become proof of something far greater, that sometimes silence can shatter every prejudice. 2 days later, Roy Merritt returned to his old home. He said nothing of the proceedings, granted no interviews, admitted no reporters. His neighbors, who once only knew him as that quiet old fellow on the porch, now regarded him with unspoken reverence. Yet he changed nothing. He still walked to the post office each morning, still watered the garden, and still settled into the familiar wooden chair when evening fell. Only one thing was different. On his mantel now rested a small wooden box with a glass front. Inside, the Medal of Honor sat centered, unostentatious, without embellishment. It no longer rested on his chest, nor hid away in a drawer. It simply lay there, a small object, yet heavy enough to rock a courtroom. Beside the box lay a neatly folded flag. Below it, a plank of wood engraved with the names of his fallen comrades, not their formal ranks, but nicknames. Tex, Doc, Mace. Names understood only by those who served together, preserved in a single man's memory. That evening, when the hearth's glow was the only pale amber light in the room, Roy sat in his wooden chair, lights off, television silent. He rested his hand gently on the armrest and gazed at the glass box. In that stillness, nothing stirred, except within him, something profound settled, not relief, but acceptance. That sometimes the battle is not fought with weapons, but with timely silence. That honor need not be held high for all to see, but only understood by one to prevent its death. In that quiet lay all he had never said. The nights pulling comrades from burning wreckage, the mornings spent staring at fallen friends, unsure what to report. The dissonance when people called him a hero while he only saw faces that would never return. No words can close the lives of men like Roy. No script can bear the full weight of it on screen. Only silence can, and that silence stays with you longer than any performance. And in that room, there were no applause. Only an old man, an old chair, a folded flag, and a medal that needed no further proof. Because from that day on, everyone saw the most important truth. He needed no one to confirm his worth. He only needed to remember, and that remembrance, no court could ever strip away. Some moments need no music, no spotlight, no running caption. They need only a glance, a breath, and a silence long enough to touch something real in every heart. Roy Merritt's story is not about victory, nor about the splendor of a medal. It is about something deeper. Honor does not reside in the medal we wear, but in how we live with our memories. Honor is when we stay silent so others can be heard, when we rise, not for ourselves, but for what is right. In a world growing ever louder, we often forget the power of silence. Yet sometimes, silence carries the greatest weight. It reminds us of sacrifices never named, of acts of kindness omitted from the headlines, of those who lived, not to be celebrated, but to ensure that what is right endures. Roy did not need to win the trial. He did not seek apologies. What he needed was to see truth undistracted, and when that happened, not through law, nor through media, but through courage and camaraderie, an entire system was compelled to stop and listen. That is our lesson. Honor cannot be revoked if we live faithfully to our experiences. That silence can, at times, be the noblest way to say, I remember, and I remain. Thank you for following this story to its final moments. If you found meaning here, share it with a loved one or friend, especially someone in the United States. Perhaps there you'll find another Roy Merritt, quiet, steadfast, and deserving of being heard. We would be grateful if you leave a comment below the video, sharing your thoughts. And if you can, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you. We want to know where this story is traveling. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next stories. Stories that will not only move you, but stay with you. Because sometimes, a single moment of silence is enough to change how we see an entire lifetime.